Hi, my name is Diana Lang, and I will be discussing Henry Ford, who, depending on who you are talking to, is considered either an excellent or reprehensible leader. Henry Ford was born on July 30th, 1863, in Wayne County, Michigan, to William and Mary Ford. Although Henry Ford grew up in an agrarian community typical of the times, he was lucky enough to have a prosperous family that was respected within the community. The Industrial Revolution, a movement that he would come to, in many ways, become the symbol of, began during the early years of his childhood and would have a formative impact on his entire life. His primary contribution to the world came in 1903 when he opened the Ford Motor Company. He would die later in 1947, struggling with his own legacy and the changing landscape of the American way of life. Henry Ford is widely considered to be the father of automation, believing that workers could most effectively produce when they were given low-skill, highly repetitive tasks. This belief in the assembly line allowed Ford to make the Model T a staple in the American home and made him one of the wealthiest men in America during his life. However, Ford contributed more than just a car and the assembly line to the American way of life. He was famous for offering his employees a $5 a day wage, which is more than double the average wages of a factory worker when he first made the offer. This financial incentive gave the American middle class more fighting power in their struggle for humane working conditions and provided an industry leader that other industrialists were required to play catch up to. Henry Ford was a highly principled man, a trait which would both serve as the underpinnings of his greatness and would ultimately become the source of his significant shortcomings. Henry Ford was deeply Christian, and his beliefs influenced his sincere desire to see his workers cared for. In expanding his business, he rarely put shareholders first, as is too often seen today. Instead, Henry Ford believed that by ensuring workers were well cared for and customers had a reason to return, the company would ultimately be more successful and shareholders would eventually be taken care of. Ford also had significant personal failings, especially later in his life. Although Ford maintained a dedicated and loving marriage to his first wife, there is significant evidence that he eventually adopted a mistress. Additionally, Henry Ford would eventually utilize his economic leverage to bully his employees into adopting a way of life that he idolized from his early childhood. This included requiring employees to allow searches of their homes for items such as alcohol and preventing full compensation for men and women who lived in homes that had two incomes. Eventually, Ford would develop a gripping obsession with anti-Semitism as well, publishing unfounded conspiracy stories in the Dearborn Independent, a small newspaper that he owned and circulated through his dealerships. He would eventually blame all shortcomings on Jewish capitalists, who he believed were manipulating the war effort for their profit. Because of his significant stature in the American mind, he legitimized ideas that would have otherwise been relegated to the fringe elements of society. I believe that Ford serves as both inspiration and cautionary tale. This is a man who developed a product with the people in mind. While it is often overlooked, the Model T was not the first automobile. Instead, it was the first automobile designed with the everyday consumer in mind. Henry Ford labored to deliver a better, more productive life to the American worker. In this, he was successful. Not only did he make the automobile, but he transformed cities from population outliers to the primary hubs of human residency in the United States. Still, he wasn't happy with the changes that ultimately resulted. Ford saw the vehicle as a work tool, not a symbol of social status, and was heartbroken by the eventual developments within the industry. He was admirably moral for most of his life, but tyrannically so when it came to his own employees. For myself, Henry Ford represents the promise and potential of approaching a task the right way, while simultaneously demonstrating the dangers that hubris moralism can breed. In Ford, we can find a model of efficient thinking and dedication to his fellow man, but we can also find a man swallowed by his mistrust and self-centered assuredness. While I admire Henry Ford's inventiveness and spirit of community, I hope that I can avoid the pitfalls of his self-centered selfishness.